One. Hi, everybody. I'm back with Jude Montague. We're going to do the talk about sun and stone circles, which Jude knows is one of my favourite subjects. And we did a show recently on the Latvian, if I said that right, Latvian,
Yeah, Latvian, or I think it's a
Latvian.
mixture you're going for of Latvian and Livonian, which is an old word for Latvian. We don't tend to use it so much now. But yeah, you've got them together.
Bring up my new language. But
Yeah.
so we were going to continue on from that show, and you was going to explain about standing stones and a connection, or a stone circle and a connection. I'm going to hand over to you, Jude.
I'm not going to just go for it. Yeah, because I like to sing Latvian folk music, and it's a really interesting window for me. I like to see it as a window onto prehistoric times because this is a form of paganism in the songs that has been continuous and hasn't been so interrupted by church songs. So they all there's so many spells and so many like chants and little ditties to the deities that also go with the time of year, the pagan circle of how the seasons change, the spring and the summer and the autumn and the winter. And we were talking a bit about that last time. And I wanted to go on to something that I've been really interested in, which is the Saule, the sun goddess. And I think it was a real mind-blowing moment for me when I realized that in this mythology, Saule, the sun goddess, was female, the female sun, and Menes, the god of war, and the moon, the god of war. And that made me think as well because of the circle, because Saule's symbol is a kind of circle or a square, that there's a lot of symbology that is associated with the gods that you see in knitting and different types of patterns that are made. And the sun goddess one has got this, is always like a circle with maybe a shape in the middle of it. And it reminded me of some of the symbology that they've seen that has been representing the stone circles, particularly obviously Stonehenge, but the circle of the sun seems to be there as well. And this seems to be a connection. And I thought, what if I can speculatively imagine that because of this very simple symbology, I can look back at Stonehenge as being the place of a sun goddess. And it really started to work for me in my mind because of this, her being such an important goddess especially in the northern hemisphere where it's very cold, so therefore the sun can be seen as very benign presence. You bring your children out into the sun to get some vitamin D, and you know that they're more healthy in the sun, and this sort of kind caress of the sun. I mean, we feel it all the time sitting around, and it's a beautiful sun on your skin. And I really thought I could see this. And the other thing about the stone in the Latvian songs is it's a very important motif that comes up in a lot of the songs about the stone. Akmens, they call it, which I guess is like, yeah, Akmens, Akmens, Akmens. And there's often grey stones in songs, or a grey stone at the end of a field. This comes up frequently, and that makes me think obviously of stone circles or standing stones, let's say, maybe individual standing stones. I haven't really come across stone circles in the Latvian context, but definitely the magical power of the stone. And in keeping with things that we also recognize, the idea of the sword and the horse and the stone, these images come up time and time again. And I suppose a stone is what you might sharpen a sword on. There's the different songs that explore different things, but yes, that image of the grey stone at the end of the field is a frequent sort of appearance.
Do they have any stories of, because like I do lots of mythology on stones, as you know, and in Britain we've got quite a few stories about stones that walk, stones that move, usually from the field down to the river down below. So I wondered if there was any perhaps stories like that in their songs.
Oh, moving stones. No, not so much. Often the songs are more like kind of chants. They're not necessarily a chant, but they tell a little story, but it might be it's a simple story, and sometimes it's a little bit more like it could be a type of little spell. So, for instance, you might have a horse crossing a stream, and the rider drops the sword in the stream, and that the stream is very clear, and you just have these very simple images like the sword falling in the stream, the water is clear, there's white sand at the bottom of the river, and then often have numbers, so 3 or 9 maidens.
Magic numbers.
Magic brothers that I have, those often from the point of view of the girl, and she has her 9 brothers, sad ones. Oh my, 9 brothers died at sea. But they're not like tragic stories where they go through the whole narrative. It's like a little chanty little spell song about boat on the sea, and it's a windy day, and I went to the sea to mourn my 9 brothers. And yeah, there's one aspect that comes up a lot as well, which is about the orphan girl, because there's often they have serdiniti, which is the orphan girl, and they're often they need the blessings of the sun goddess. They're like the goddaughter of Saule. She takes on her blessings for the goddaughter of the unfortunate, or maybe the orphaned or homeless girl. A lot of them are done from that point of view, and they often talk about the brothers in this context. 9 brothers and so forth. But there always seems to be hill forts from the Iron Age around Europe, and Latvia's no difference. It's got lots of old hill forts and lots of standing stones, or stones in fields that perhaps have grassed over with the time.
Well, I think also whoever made the standing stones, because we don't really know, do we? They definitely were some kind of a European, or even perhaps worldwide, because standing stones are found in India. Standing stones are found, I think, in every country or every continent. I should say, maybe not every country, more like every continent. So there was something going on worldwide, and whether it was stone circles or perhaps avenues of stones. So with Latvia, has that got a sea, or is that any one of those countries that's enclosed by other countries? I kind of forget.
Yeah, it's not a country that we know about, which is why it's really good to talk about it more and more. And I love introducing the Baltics to people, because I didn't know so much about it. It was hidden by the Iron Curtain from me growing up, and I find it all really fascinating. And yes, it's got a sea at the north coast, and then it has on Estonia is to the right.
Okay, yeah.
And then Lithuania to the left. And Latvian language and Lithuanian language have something in common, but Estonian has more in common with Finnish. It's in a group with Finland, with the Finnish language. So yeah, the Baltic languages of Latvia and Estonia have got kind of isolated in a way, not many speakers. So I think it's really fascinating to bring them up. And I was talking last time about the relation between that and the Indo-European language research, which has connected it into the horse culture, the horse gods culture of northern India and Sanskrit.
Yeah, I wonder if anyone's done. I have to look up whether anyone's done any megalithic surveys of that area, because I've definitely read about Estonia's megalithic sites that are there. So it'd be interesting to look at Latvia's. I've not really looked at Lithuania. But what I did wanted to say, actually, what you were saying earlier about like the stories and the number 9, again, magical numbers, seems very related to archetypes. And sometimes with these songs from the old, there's like an exoteric meaning for the peoples to sing along and dance with, and there's perhaps maybe a deeper meaning for the more, let's say, in tuned or awakened people that would help them with the perhaps understanding of the ancient knowledge or the ancient wise wisdom. What would you think on that?
Well, I definitely know that they are tied into the ancient wisdom of the seasons. And I think this is where the idea of the sun goddess also really is so attractive to me to interpret the stone circles, because it's in Latvian culture, in this old Latvian culture, it's about the farmstead and keeping it going. It's very much the agricultural seasons or the times of the year. And this does seem to be what people have noticed about the stone circles, that appears to be something that everybody comes back to, is this idea of them being like a calendar and being not I mean, I don't know how much it was a total astronomy kind of center like people really get into, but it must have been some kind of astronomy center, certainly with the sun and the moon and the stars, but definitely with the circling of the year, with the rotation of the year. And that there's an interesting phenomenon as well in the spring, because they have this idea of the swing. It's still really out there in Easter time. It's not a swing for children, but a swing for adults. And it's something that also is in North India, and I've seen people swinging on it in Afghanistan at certain times of the year. And there is this idea in the folk songs that the swing swings the year into action. So you're helping make the earth go round, you're in tune with the movement of the earth. And again, it's another sort of, it's part of a circle of motion, a pendulum. And
I love that. I work,
yeah.
I do a lot of talks about pendulums with people when I'm doing my deeper knowledge, ancient wisdom little workshops with people, because the pendulum is very important in, like you say, keeping the energy going, getting the action, the not necessarily the pendulum from going left to right, but like you say, the swing and motion of it. And I love that about a swing. I'm going to make one for spring, but we also talk about the pendulum in the I suppose the esoteric ancient wisdom of, you're swinging it. So you start from here, and then you get balanced here, and then you're swinging back up, and then it starts again. And that again would be the year from winter to summer. Summer slows down, and we're going back up. Yeah, and then it starts again. Yeah, which of course, when we're recording this, we're in the autumn season, so we're in the last part of the year. We're getting ready for a new year. Well, some people it already is New Year because Sam Haines cast as New Year.
Yeah, there'll be a turn, obviously, that we all know about. The solstice comes up and we have the turn in the sun pattern. But looking at the summer stopping still, that's certainly something they talk about in the songs as well, because they have the idea of the sun stopping still, because there's like 3 days in which the sun doesn't seem to move. It doesn't seem to go around the earth anymore. It doesn't set really so much, especially the further north you get, the more this phenomenon is, the more the sun does stand still. And that's very much a part of the summer cycle of Saule. And as you say, on the pendulum, and that moment that you can see. You don't need to have a degree in mathematics to see this mathematics in motion, even though there are calculations for it that no doubt are very interesting if you know how to calculate it. But you have to look at the shape. I like to look at the shape of the swing that they use in these Latvian rituals, which is not like a swing where you go backwards and forwards on it, but you have one that's curved like this. So it doesn't look like our fairground swings, but I think that's really good because it really emphasizes that this is the sacred movement that you are, and when you're swinging, you're mimicking microcosm, macrocosm, that movement of the sun around the earth and that spinning of the earth.
Well, I was thinking when you were speaking at the beginning of this, you was talking about the circles and the squares. And obviously there's the old adage of squaring the circle and circling the square. And again, that's continuing on of some ancient wisdom that we still don't really understand. Again, but it's sacred geometry. And like what you were saying just now, you don't need a degree in maths to understand how all this works. So I do find geometry quite difficult at times.
Certainly not sitting down studying geometry. I love it.
I can add and subtract.
Oh, it's very exciting geometry. Can't go too much into it, but yeah. But I think there's all this geometry in the stones, but it is basically a very simple geometry, and I think the circle is at the heart of it. And I think the symbols for it, the way you can carry off an image of the circle as well, and make it something you take with you and put it with you for good luck.
Yeah, well, in many countries or ancient wisdoms, the circle is the shape, is the symbol for the sun, and the square is the earth. So we're circling, the sun's circling the square.
Mm.
We're trying to square the circle.
I wanted to ask you what you think about when you think about the stone circles in particular, because I use this Latvian thing for a one of the things I use it for personally, or I love about it, is it helps me speculate about what the stone circles might have been in this kind of pre-Druid, because now I think we're not really necessarily saying that it was a Druid thing, the old stone circles, that they might have been from a later users of the stone circles, but not the people who put it up. And so I like to look back to this prehistoric imagine time that I'm imagining of the sun goddess and of people building them in order to make their society work and keep everybody focused. It's amazing. If I imagine it was like pilgrimages and people would go to these different stone circle sites, and as you say, it seems that it was like a European wide further as well culture, that there was more things that people had more in common through this particular cultural thing. I mean, maybe they also had more localized worship as well, but maybe they had multiple worships going on all the time. But definitely this European and wide. And we're talking about traveling. I think people would have gone from one pilgrim site to another and gone on these walks, and then they want to see something when they get to the destination that reminds them of why they're walking. I presume, just like a lot of pagan pilgrimages, people would have gone to get healed.
Well, yeah, I was going to say, because I think that the different stone circles are set on like vortices, maybe different energies. So, and I think all the standing stones were like avenues directing you to each circle. So there might be, I think there was avenues in all over the country and Europe. And I think back then, I'm pretty sure Europe was more joined to Britain. As we all know, there was that Doggerland up north, and then probably where the channel is at the moment was raised. It wasn't full of water. So I think there was more of a connection. But I think the stone circles themselves were some kind of vortex, also aligned to suns and stars and moons, because you can see from different, well, we're assuming, speculating, different standing stone circles do align to certain star systems, some to Orion, some to Deneb, the bird, I think it's the swan one. So I think when people were traveling to the different circles, they were getting different energy, like you were saying, healing, or whether it was a different energy, perhaps, I don't know, energizing your mind, or perhaps another one energized the heart. So they did have to do this, like you were saying, pilgrimage between them, between each one. And I think they were definitely traveling a lot more from countries than the historians like to say. I think it was a much more, I forgot what the name of it is, not a diaspora, because that's when they spread, but I think people were traveling a lot to go to these different sites. I don't think it was the Druids, but I think the Druids took on that mantle after whoever these people were before. I'm quite into Maria Wheatley's idea of these long skulled people that used to be around, that maybe they were the ones that dealt with it all. I know the academics keep quite quiet about that, and they hide away a lot of the long skull skeletons that were found, and not ones that were people that were binding the skulls, the babies from young. Actual, they've got a different etymology and different bodily skull to us. Like we have to have the line that goes across there and across there on our skull, and it all joins together in our 20s. I can't remember the technical terms, but the long skulled ones, they have that line, but not that line. So they could definitely think differently to us. Their brains were in a different, perhaps even attuned to the earth more than we are, which is why they made these stone circles, possibly because they could sense that these stone circles were on certain, I want to say the word vortices, but that's not necessarily the right word, but a certain energy is coming up from the planet that's also being affected from the sun and the moon at certain times of the year. Um, But
Wow.
that's my theory on it. Or I don't think they were actually made by humans.
Well, I
Uh,
think it's really interesting that this idea of the energies, because we're all also modern scientists are starting to see how important electrical energy is in the formation of life forms. Because I mean, some people won't quite like this, but there are experiments at the moment that they're doing to on little worms, and um, in order to use the bioelectrics to form the shape of the worm, because we always used to think in modern science that it was the DNA that was directing everything. But in actual fact, the DNA has a mechanism that it needs to use to get the cells to behave in particular ways and develop and shape themselves. And they do that through bioelectricity. So what they've done recently is they've shown how they can interfere with and alter the bioelectric field, and it can encourage the organism, get the organism to develop into a different shape, because
so it's got some kind of effect on it, but it's
but
that
yes,
effect depends on the electrical vibration or something of what it's doing.
yeah, the movement of electrons. I mean, it is a scientific thing they're absolutely doing about the movement of the electrons, and that being the mechanism or part of the way in which organic forms develop. There's a what's his name, Levin. Can't remember his first name, but he's been speaking about this quite a bit and doing the experiments.
Because I used to follow that kind of thing when I was writing my book on Nikola Tesla. I'm a bit behind on it all at the moment, but I do feel there's a connection between electromagnetism, electricity, and magnetism on its own, and our own developments of ourselves and our brains and our minds and our bodies. And I think we can heal ourselves with it. And I think that's something Tesla was working on, Nikola Tesla. But I also think that's what the ancient Egyptians were doing. And maybe that's what was also being done with the megalithic stones, because they all carry a, I always say it wrong. I always say pizza vibe, but it's a pizza current in them, or pizza current. I don't know how
I
to
know
say
what
the
you mean.
word.
Yeah,
So, and that is also affected. There's been studies that it changes throughout the day. It also changes throughout the year, going up and down in grades, depending on the sun's radiation, or the rays, definitely.
yeah. Well, there is radiation from the sun. Yeah.
Mm. So
Well,
it,
that's so interesting. I never thought about that. The cycle, the day cycle, electromagnetism and current during the day.
yeah, I've
I
been
mean,
myself to Standing
yeah,
Stones, measured it, going them up. I got taught this technique again. I'm bringing Maria Wheatley up again. She talks about it in her book, and my friend Janet um, used to her and her husband Tom Graves wrote a book about it all, and you can feel the difference through the day, but it also you can feel the difference as it's going up the stone, and it starts off all excited and full of it in the beginning of the day, and by the end of the day it's winding down. It's an amazing thing. I take you,
yeah.
we have to go to a Standing Stone together one day. Definitely.
Feel the cycle. Well, I think also you were very interesting. You were saying about the alignments of energies and the stars, because I think that people probably navigated with the stars. Maybe they walked at night, and because there would you've got that alternative walk. You can walk during the day and see everything, but also if there's a big group of you pilgrimages, you can also walk at night. And you'd think perhaps doing these type of pilgrimages, you might do them at night in a large group, going by the lights of the stars.
Yeah, I don't think they went to bed as soon as it was dark. I know some of the academics like to say that in winter time they spent most of their time in bed because it was too dark. I think they were doing things and probably, like you say, going out working with the stars. Definitely the people that were the, well, I say the word druids, but that the wise people of them times, the cunning folk would have been going out to uh, use them as auguries, to learn from them, to see what's coming. To
Yeah,
like recently, I don't know if you know, Mars has been super bright red in these last few weeks. And
and
you
Jude,
feel like
yeah,
because I know you live by the sea, so you must have some wonderful sights of seeing the stars when the light pollution's low.
Yeah, and you really see the obviously the differences in the moon, but I think this idea of navigating by the stars and reading the future and reading humanity's life or your own life by the stars is very powerful, and it's sort of got degraded, I guess, into what we have as modern astrology, because you've got all these newspaper columns that's also just a bit of psychological fun. But if you take it a bit deeper and you just think about the ancient peoples who no doubt did predict so much and make decisions based on movement of the planets, it begins to make more sense as somebody who's sort of science orientated now, that kind of thing, because obviously out of that you get the development of astronomy and mathematics. On a slightly different note, but one that really fascinates me, the Babylonian clock, the Babylonian mathematics seems to reflect something of this sun culture to me, because it's about the year and the turning of the year, because it's about the circle, and we still can tell there's so much Babylonian thinking in our mathematics and how we are, because anything that's in base 60 is Babylonian, and you can see with all the angles for the circle is 360 degrees for the circle, and all these divisions, they come from Babylonian stuff. And people sometimes say perhaps they reckon perhaps that mathematics evolved partly from the two peoples coming together, and one of them was working in base 10 because of 10 fingers, and one of them was working in base 5, I think. Oh, what was it? But they collided two different, they reckon, and that's why it ended up as 60. But I think it's a really beautiful type of mathematics, base 12, and we used to have it in our counting systems in many more times. The dozen used to be very important, but in numerology as well, I think it's very satisfying, because 3 times 4 is 12, and it's such a, if you're somebody who enjoys the aesthetic of maths, I think base 12's got a huge amount of, there's a lot of beauty in that, the 4 times 3, 3 times 4 relationships.
Well, it's interesting because for me, I'm from the Gurdjieff line, of course, and we talk about the law of three a lot. And Gurdjieff says, and Nikola Tesla said as well, if we understand the laws of 3, 6, and 9, we'd understand the universe. Because I used to think, why isn't everything done in tens? Like you were saying, we've got 10 things easy to count, and the ancient Egyptians did it in tens.
Yeah.
But obviously, this 12 ways come through, one through, but it does make more sense once you get to understand the more deeper esoteric side as well. That's what works. Threes, most things work in threes.
It's much more suitable for a circle type of way of thinking, because 60, it does, you can imagine just in tens, if you had just 10, that's not going to split very well, a circle, because you end up with 5, and that's kind of asymmetrical.
Yeah, it breaks up into fragments, and I think this is why people still don't properly understand the megalithic measurements. I know we've got the megalithic yard has been discovered. Whether it's the right measurement, we still don't really know, though it does seem to fit. But that, I believe, is to do with a series of 12. So they're keeping, there definitely used to be an ancient numerology that should still be being used today, and it's what links us to the pint and the meter, or the foot rather, I should say. I think the meter is the one they're trying to take over. So yeah, we need to keep with the law of three, peoples.
Yeah, I think we need to have, well, I think we can split our minds and use different maths for different purposes. But I really, really like the base 12 and the 60s, and my head enjoys it. It enjoys the way it works. But yeah, I think if I went back, if I try and reimagine that time through the Latvian folk songs, this ancient prehistory, I do think of people traveling and traveling at night with the moon, maybe Menes, the moon goddess, maybe soldiers, maybe pilgrims, going from places of stone worship to another place of stone worship, possibly going to heal themselves and do activities that would be pilgrimages, just like people go to Lourdes. And I think there's not only, although it would be specifically for Saule, the sun goddess, I think there would be other gods represented that would be able to appear in these stone circles. And I'm sure it would be seen as a divine space, a special space inside the stone circle. And that doesn't mean that it's got to be a place of sacrifice, but a place of ceremony and a place for energies to materialize after you go through the sacred entrance. Once you're there, you would feel part of the energy of the of this group gathering. And I
definitely think the originals, they did not I think myself, I don't get the feeling that there was sacrifice in there. It was more service. We're doing service.
Yes, I think so. I mean, I think sacrifice is such a pretty extreme kind of case that I imagine it's not everywhere, and it probably only comes up occasionally. I think of maybe a slight difference with the sacrifice of, say, of somebody, which is very sad. I think the ancient peoples weren't kind if people were deformed and what they considered deformed. Sadly, I'm not sure how benign they were on that. I mean, I don't know anything at all, but I mean, the idea of exposure, I think, that they had for poor, weak babies was definitely something that I would consider could have, if my speculations could have been part of their dealings with those kind of difficulties.
Yeah, but there would have been difficulties in them times, but I do hear in some places, obviously this is again academics' ideas, that they were perhaps revered instead because there were so few of them and they were seen as different. And
interesting.
It is interesting that they become the ones that become the, giving the holy wisdom. Or I know we do have records of when families had problems like that or a child born like that, they would normally donate it to the local monastery or the local church or something like that, and it would become involved in the, hopefully that's the more humane way of dealing with people, disabled people with obviously some kind of disability.
People, but that sad thing when a community rejects a baby for being a bit different.
Yeah.
Really nice though that idea that they could have been actually of great value to the whole community, considered that by the way of thinking in a holy way or a spiritual kind of, considered of having extra spiritual value, and why not that to my sort of imagination, to my speculative mind, I could imagine that in the community that I'm sort of visionizing.
Yeah. We're going to run out of time soon, so I just wanted to quickly ask you, because I meant to ask you this last time. Definitely feels like there's some dancing going on, but you didn't learn any of the old ancient Latvian dances, or do they show anything, do anything like that anywhere?
It's interesting about dance in particular, because sometimes if there's old images, people recreate dances based on the images that provide. But we haven't really got, I don't think, I've not come across pictorial images apart from the symbology that's supposed to be pretty ancient, that is very abstract looking. But I think that the popularity of dance just is still going so strong in the dance music, and lots of the old tunes are seen as dance music. The Latvian dances are sort of quite country dancey-ish, that we kind of recognize a bit of that country dance thing, but also they're very jolly, and there's a lot that are the kind of the pair, but a group of pairs, so that kind of ritual of
community on dance. But not in the park.
Something to do and have fun when you get together, isn't it? I mean, why wouldn't you want to dance?
Yeah. And you had a gig recently, so hopefully lots of people came along and danced to that. Have you got any more gigs coming up soon, or what's happening with the band?
Oh yeah, well, our crazy organ music that we make, we've got a record coming out on Dimple Discs, and it's a new instrumental kind of vibe, and that's going to be we're going to do a launch here in Hastings and a launch in London on the 1st of December, and the launch in Hastings on the 16th of December at the Nest. The one in London's at Amp Studios, which is in the Old Kent Road. Everybody would be so great if they, yeah, if anybody wants to come down. But anyway, we'll be releasing it on the internet next year, so people will.
Super. Because your Hammond organ album was one of my favourite